You say to yourself, I would love to have this guy's body. Wow, look at how beautiful this man looks.
Okay, no homo. Hey guys, what up? Tominator here, and today I've got something special in store for you. Because in this video, we're going to be counting down the top 20 most aesthetic bodybuilders of all time. Originally, I was going to do a top 10, but there's simply been way too many quality physiques over the years, so I had to expand it to 20, and even then it felt very limiting. You know what, actually, when I was putting this video together, I realized it was going to be really long, so I've decided to break it up into two parts. So this first part, we're just going to cover that 20th to 11th position. And then in the second part, we'll go through, we'll count down from 10 to 1. So that's what's up. So stay tuned for this. Now, keep in mind that this list, more so than any other perhaps, is going to be highly subjective. Because when we talk about aesthetics, that's really a very personal matter in terms of what you prefer to see in a physique and what's most pleasing to you as an individual. So it's pretty tough to be objective in this, right? It's not like some of the other lists I put together, like the top 10 bodybuilders of all time, for example, where you can appeal to things like how many Olympias has the guy won, or how many pro titles did he accumulate, or anything quantifiable like that. No, with aesthetics, this is purely about the visual appeal of the physique itself, and really nothing more. So how well they placed, or whether or not they ever won an Olympia, is frankly irrelevant. All we should really care about is how good a bodybuilder looks. I guess the best way to put it is to paraphrase Arnold and ask yourself, who would you rather look like? I think if we keep this question in mind, it'll really help us narrow it down. Also, one more thing to note is that this list is strictly focused on bodybuilders, and more specifically, guys who have competed at the Olympia level and other major IFBB shows in the open class, okay? So none of these trending social media guys or physique or classic bodybuilders or anything like that. So don't expect to see Z's or Ulysses Jr. or any of these douchebags here. That's not what my channel is about, and frankly I don't follow any of these guys, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know or care much about them. No offense to you if you do, but I'm just not really into it. So without further ado, let's check it out. At number 20, we have Cedric McMillan. So Cedric, as many of you would be aware, is probably the most aesthetic top pro in the game today. There's a couple other names you could throw into the mix, like Sean Roden, Lionel Bayeki, or Brandon Curry, but to me what puts Cedric ahead of those other guys is the posing. So in the last couple years, he's really kind of brought back the classical posing style with a more artistic routine consisting of old school and unique non-mandatory poses. So Cedric is helping to shift the emphasis of bodybuilding back to its roots as an art form, rather than just a muscle mass freak show. So the posing, along with his good proportions and lines and nice full muscle bellies, is why I ultimately decided to include Cedric in this highly exclusive list. Truth be told, I actually cycled through like 3 or 4 guys for this 20th spot before eventually settling on him, but at the end of the day, I feel like Cedric has earned his position here. I mean, in this day and age, it's also refreshing to see a guy with such height and mass who doesn't have a distended midsection. That alone deserves some props and automatically puts him among the most aesthetic bodybuilders competing today, if not the most aesthetic. Next up, at number 19, we have Larry Scott, the first Mr. Olympia. I feel like this is a guy who often gets overlooked to a degree when we talk about aesthetics by other old school bodybuilders like Steve Reeves and Frank Zane and even Arnold, but Scott really had a very pleasing physique as well, and one that was especially impressive for his era. He had a very Arnold-like upper body with similarly outstanding biceps, some great forearms, and a solid V-taper. You can see from some of these photos the obvious influence he had on the Austrian oak. In fact, Arnold clearly took a couple of pages right out of Scott's playbook with the straight arm poses seen here. He even looks like he might be related to Arnold in this photo. The resemblance is uncanny. Larry Scott just had a very balanced body. Nothing looked out of proportion, and in my opinion, his shape and fullness were somewhat ahead of his time. And another guy who was very ahead of his time was this next guy, the myth, Sergio Oliva, coming in at number 18. Now, some people may disagree with this. I know some people don't really like the look of his body at all, while others feel that this placing would be way too low. But I think Sergio's incredible proportions and near-perfect bodybuilding structure really make him a pretty aesthetic bodybuilder. He had a very small waist as well, which really helped accentuate his V-taper, and he was complete, with no lagging body parts. This victory pose has got to be one of the most impressive-looking and aesthetic poses in the history of bodybuilding, so that alone pretty much garners him a place on this list. The reason why I don't have Sergio any higher up, however, is because he was lacking polish. He was something of a diamond in the rough, and what I mean by that is that he didn't have the best definition, so you couldn't pick out those finer details in his muscles that really add that level of polish to a bodybuilder's physique. Now, that's not really that apparent in a photo such as this, but keep in mind I'm picking the very best photos of these guys for the most part. So typically when this guy was standing on stage, he didn't look quite as defined and well-conditioned as we see here. He also wasn't the best poser, so that kind of hurt him as well, because posing ability is really a difference maker when it comes to the aesthetics. Take, for example, a guy like Paul Dillette, who is probably the most shapely mass monster of all time. Well, needless to say, he doesn't make the cut because his posing was horrendous, and when you're not able to showcase your physique properly, it doesn't matter how good your genetics are. Now, obviously, Sergio Oliva wasn't that bad, but the point still stands that his posing wasn't the best, and that kind of knocks him down a couple of spots. Also, you can see that his shape and symmetry is a little off in this front double bicep pose, where one tricep is noticeably longer and bigger than the other, and that kind of throws off his symmetry a bit. So just little things like that cost him in my opinion. Still, undoubtedly an impressive physique, and I feel he solidly deserves to be on here. Plus, whatever he lacked in terms of posing or polish, he made up for it with some sick style, as you can see him here looking like a total pimp in this tight-ass polo and cap and that blingin' wristwatch. What a boss. Next up, we have 8-time Mr. Olympia Lee Haney, a guy with one of the best lat spreads in the business. Haney, like Sergio, really had phenomenal structure with a great shoulder-to-waist ratio and excellent muscle insertions, especially when it comes to those super low lats. You can kind of catch it right here just how low down they go, but in any case, this was the last Mr. Olympia to be truly sculpturesque as far as I'm concerned. He was also the last to be able to hit a stomach vacuum, probably no coincidence, a feat which makes for quite a sight when done in the front double bicep pose as seen here. What I really like about Lee is that his upper body looks absolutely enormous thanks to those humongous lats. If we were being completely honest, it's also partly due to the fact that his legs were perhaps a tad undersized and would certainly be considered too small by today's standards. But that's the thing, if you think about it, pretty much no aesthetic bodybuilder is lower body dominant. And what I mean by that is that guys just tend to look better when they're more top heavy, if anything, or at least when they have leaner legs. I mean, consider who's more aesthetic, Arnold Schwarzenegger or Tom Platz, Lee Haney or Branch Warren. Yeah, I think you get the picture. I feel like when the legs get too big, it really throws off the balance, and the proportions just don't look quite right anymore. So, anyway, back to Lee Haney and his magnificent back. The only thing you can really pick apart on the guy is that his arms were a little too small compared to that massive torso, and you can see that clearly in this pic right here. Now, it's a small complaint because he still looks terrific, but this is probably the main reason why I don't have him any higher, because it just throws off his proportions ever so slightly in my eyes. Nonetheless, still an incredible body and one of the most aesthetic bodybuilders of all time, without question. Coming in at number 16 is Mohammad Macawi, who is easily the shortest and lightest bodybuilder on this list at about 5'2" or 5'3", and somewhere around 160 pounds in contest shape. But this little guy packed a punch and was all about quality over quantity, since his muscles were perfectly shaped and he brought that super ripped conditioning. And the thing about Macawi that I liked most, however, was his posing. The guy hit a ton of artistic shots like these right here that really show off his body to the fullest. So here was a master of illusion and playing the angles to make himself appear more muscular than he really was. And he also had a fantastic set of perfectly symmetrical abs and good legs to boot. So for a man of his body weight to display this level of muscularity is kind of shocking, honestly. So, even though he's short, you wouldn't expect a guy who only weighs about $160 to look this big and impressive, right? At number 15, we have Robbie Robinson, a guy who I feel is highly and thoroughly underrated, in the aesthetics department especially. I mean, he had it all, a tiny waist, big round biceps and triceps, the flaring lats. Even the lower body was well developed for his time and very well balanced with his upper body. Robinson could also hit a vacuum, and is one of the few bodybuilders I would actually want to look like if I was strolling down a beach. Plus, he looked absolutely massive in certain pictures like this one here. Now, true, his arms are flattened against that pad, making them appear even larger than they really are, but still, the guy looks like he just stepped out of a comic book, for God's sake. It's just epic. And here he is, once again, speaking of epic, looking like a superhero posing on the beach. One of the best beach bods in all of bodybuilding, that's for sure. And finally, we see him again in this black and white photo shoot, looking like some kind of ancient heroic statue. Truly underrated in my opinion, and there's no way that he wasn't going to make my list. So, Melvin Anthony is my choice for number 14, and notice the immediate similarity between him and the last guy. I feel like Melvin is kind of like the reincarnation of Robbie Robinson in a lot of ways, because both guys have a similar kind of physique, with the round, full arms and the sweeping lats tapering down into that super slim waistline. The only difference with Melvin, or the major difference anyway, is that he was quite a bit bigger, especially when it comes to the wheels, competing as he did, roughly 3 decades later. So Melvin was also famous for his posing. He put on quite the spectacle pretty much every time he stepped out there with his signature moves like the Matrix limbo thing, and the splits, and the pop and lock and dance and stuff he did. So here he is in some of the best shape of his life at the 2001 Ironman Pro, where he brought an absolutely godlike physique to the stage. So I already did a whole video on this posing routine this year, so you can check it out if you haven't already. I'll put a link in the description or something, because he really earned his nickname Marvelous Melvin Anthony at that show. And here you can see the incredible V-taper on display with arms each damn near almost as big as his waist. So the proportions on this guy were just cartoonish, but in a good way. And you can see the wheels looking massive, but not oversized. He still maintained great balance and shape, even while carrying a lot of mass on his relatively small frame. And here's one more of him on the beach. Now, I don't know about you, but to me this is pretty much perfection as far as I'm concerned. In fact, I wouldn't blame you if you said that he should be even higher up on this list after seeing these pics, but let's move on and see who's next. And that is none other than the legendary Lion of Lebanon and 1983 Mr. Olympia, Samir Bannout. Samir was another old-school bodybuilder who brought the same classic appeal as other guys of his era, but he also had one hell of a back that was way ahead of his time, and basically nobody up until this point could hang with. You can see the thickness and detail, which was really kind of off the charts for the early 80s, and the reason I put him so high up is because he hit a lot of aesthetic poses just like this. And also this one, the crucifix pose, which he did both standing and kneeling to the side. This was one of his signatures, and he knocked it out of the park. Again, as with Lee Haney, the leaner legs really make him appear both athletic and Herculean here, and in my opinion, boost his overall aesthetic appeal. And here's that amazing back again. So keep in mind, this was over 30 years ago, and that back still looks thicker and better than 95% of the guys competing today. So one of the best back double biceps of all time, hands down, and I mean, even the calves were great. The guy was just very complete. Here he is in the gym looking absolutely Arnold-esque with that massive chest and those arms and, the trim midsection and lean but muscular legs. So the aesthetics were absolutely on point. At number 12, we have one of my favorite bodybuilders, Kevin Levrone. So Levrone's interesting because his physique varied so much in size over the years, and his legs seemed to come and go, appearing bigger earlier in his career and then kind of regressing a little towards the end. But in his heyday, the Maryland Muscle Machine had one of the most breathtaking physiques of all time. So just watch him at the 1994 and 95 Olympia or the 1997 Finland Grand Prix to witness the beauty of bodybuilding in a nutshell. He was arguably also the best in several poses, including this twisting back double bi, and also, of course, his signature hands clasped most muscular and side chest. Here he is in his prime in a photo shoot with the legs still looking huge and replete with sweep and separation. His muscle bellies were unbelievably full, perhaps the most ridiculous in history along with Phil Heath in terms of that 3D effect. So this was especially prominent in his delts and triceps, but Levrone also had a 6 set of traps, pecs, and abs to complete the picture. Not to mention those lats, making his back look wide as a barn door, and just a tremendous V-taper on the guy. And he was also a skilled poser and proved very versatile in his routines, mixing it up depending on his music selection, and always igniting the crowd. So that's Kevin Levrone, holding down at number 12. At number 11, though, we have the lesser-known Frenchman Thierry Pastel, a surprisingly short fellow because he was only about 5'4" at most, I believe, but his proportions were so good you'd think that he was like half a foot taller at least. What made Pastel so aesthetic, if you ask me, was his extremely large and rounded arms. I mean, look at them, they're friggin' huge. And then in combination with that incredibly streamlined yet thickly developed midsection, I mean, this picture right here really sums it up. The guy was also reminiscent of another black French-born bodybuilder who will be featured a little bit later. And again, one of the most awe-inspiring ab and thighs you'll ever see. This guy had awesome detail when you look not only at the thick abs jutting out, but the feathered lower quads as well. And again, the arms absolutely gargantuan. And yeah, speaking of arms and massive arms, talk about a killer side tricep. Look at the mass of that horseshoe, and then contrast that with the slimness of the waistline. It's just astounding. Do we ever see this kind of thing anymore? Never. It's no wonder they say bodybuilding's lost its way. I mean, look how amazing these guys used to look. So that's it for part 1, guys. thanks for watching. I should be putting a part 2 sometime within the next week, so stay tuned for that. And, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts in the comments section below, so please let me know what you thought. And, feel free to leave a like and subscribe for more. But until next time, I'm the Tominator, signing off. I'll be back.